Have you ever wondered what ignited the powder keg that was Europe in the early 20th century, leading to the First World War? A global conflagration that forever altered the course of human history, the Great War, as it was known, was a cataclysmic event of unprecedented scale and impact. From the trenches to the home front, every corner of the globe felt its tremors. Now, let's dive into the events that led to the outbreak of this devastating conflict. The initial spark that set off the First World War was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary. This fateful event occurred on June 28, 1914, in Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia. The man behind the trigger was Gavrilo Princip, a young Bosnian Serb who was a member of the Black Hand, a secret society with the aim of uniting all South Slav territories that were then part of Austria-Hungary. Now, Archduke's assassination wasn't an isolated event, it was a manifestation of deep-seated ethnic tensions and nationalistic aspirations. Austria-Hungary in response issued an ultimatum to Serbia, demanding severe measures to suppress anti-Austrian propaganda and activities. Serbia's response fell short of Austria-Hungary's demands, leading to the declaration of war. In the grand scheme of things, this assassination was more than just a spark. It was a catalyst, a trigger that set forth a domino effect. This assassination set a series of events into motion that would draw nations into a conflict of unprecedented scale. The intricate web of alliances between the powers of Europe played a key role in escalating the conflict. In the early 20th century, Europe was a complex puzzle of alliances. These alliances were not just agreements of friendship, they were binding contracts that obligated countries to support one another in times of conflict. This network of alliances was both a deterrent and a promise of support, a paradox that would soon ignite a global conflict. At the heart of this network were two rival blocs, the Central Powers, primarily consisting of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy, and the Entente Powers, primarily comprising France, Russia, and the United Kingdom. These alliances were not static, they evolved and shifted, adding layers of complexity to the European political landscape. When Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia in July of 1914, it set off a chain reaction. Serbia was allied with Russia, who in turn was allied with France. This meant that Austria-Hungary's aggression was not just against Serbia, but indirectly against Russia and France as well. Germany, bound by its alliance with Austria-Hungary, was obligated to support them, and so the dominoes began to fall. Italy, though part of the Central Powers, chose to remain neutral at first, only to join the Entente later in 1915. The Ottoman Empire and Bulgaria would later join the Central Powers, while Japan and the United States would eventually join the Entente. Each entry into the war was like a ripple in a pond, drawing in more and more countries into the fray. Every alliance, every declaration of war, every mobilization of troops was a step towards turning a regional conflict into a global one. It was the domino effect in action, where a single event set off a chain reaction that led to a war of unprecedented scale. And so, as the dominoes fell and alliances were triggered, the world watched with bated breath. Countries far removed from the initial conflict found themselves drawn in, bound by treaties and alliances. As countries began to mobilize their forces, the world braced for a war that would span across continents. The war soon devolved into a stalemate, with both sides dug into trenches extending from the English Channel to the Swiss border. This is where the face of warfare changed dramatically, into something we now know as trench warfare. Trench warfare was a grueling, harsh reality for soldiers on both sides. These trenches, essentially deep ditches carved into the earth, served as their homes, their battlegrounds, and tragically, often their graves. The conditions were unimaginably harsh. Soldiers lived amidst mud and filth, accompanied by the constant threat of disease, the unending noise of artillery, and the chilling presence of death. Amidst all this, the soldiers had to endure the chilling cold, the suffocating heat, and the perpetual rain, all while fighting a war that seemed to have no end. This was also a time of innovation, born out of necessity. New weapons were developed to break the stalemate. The machine gun, a deadly instrument of war, became a common sight. Artillery was improved, capable of firing shells over long distances, causing devastation on an unprecedented scale. Then came the tanks, large armored vehicles designed to traverse the treacherous terrains, and the poison gas, a weapon so horrific it changed the rules of war. After 4 long years of conflict, the war finally came to an end. The final act of this global drama was marked by a series of pivotal events that set the stage for the conclusion of the First World War. In the spring of 1917, the United States, initially a neutral observer, was drawn into the fray. The unrestricted submarine warfare waged by Germany and the infamous Zimmermann telegram promising Mexico-American territories in exchange for their support were the final straws that broke the American camel's back. The entry of the United States into the war tipped the scales in favor of the Allies, providing them with fresh troops and substantial resources. Meanwhile, over in Russia, the relentless pressures of war had ignited a revolution. The Russian Revolution of 1917 led to the overthrow of the Tsarist regime, creating a power vacuum that the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, were quick to fill. The new government had no interest in continuing the war and promptly signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Germany in March 1918, formally taking Russia out of the conflict. However, the end was not yet in sight. A series of offensives launched by Germany in the spring and summer of 1918, known as the Spring Offensive, aimed to end the war before American forces could fully mobilize. But these offensives failed, leaving German forces exhausted and demoralized. Finally, after more than 4 years of relentless fighting, the tide began to turn. The Allies launched a counteroffensive, known as the 100 Days Offensive, which steadily pushed the Germans back. The Central Powers were crumbling, with Bulgaria, the Ottoman Empire, and Austria-Hungary surrendering in quick succession. By November, it was clear that Germany could not hold out much longer. Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated, and a new German government sought an armistice, or a cessation of hostilities. After a series of negotiations, an armistice was signed in a railway carriage in the forest of Compiègne, France. On November 11, 1918, the guns finally fell silent. The Great War, as it was then known, was finally over. The end of the war did not mean the end of its impact. In the aftermath of the First World War, the Treaty of Versailles was established in June of 1919. This treaty, however, was not a mere document of peace. It was a symbol of victory for some, a badge of humiliation for others. The treaty held Germany and Austria-Hungary, the Central Powers, responsible for the war, and imposed heavy penalties, reparations that would leave economic scars for decades. The war also brought about significant changes in the map of Europe. The Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires crumbled, giving birth to new nations. Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and many more emerged, forever altering the political landscape of Europe. Yet these hastily drawn borders sowed seeds of discord, issues of ethnicity and nationalism that would echo into the next century. In an attempt to prevent another devastating war, the League of Nations was formed. This was the first international organization whose principal mission was to maintain world peace. Despite its noble intentions, the League was crippled by the refusal of several nations, including the United States, to join and the inability to prevent wars when they did occur. It was a first step, albeit a flawed one, towards global governance. The societal changes brought on by the war were profound. Women, having taken on roles traditionally occupied by men during the war, started to demand greater rights and suffrage. A wave of change swept across nations, urging societies to reconsider their norms. The war had shaken the world from its slumber, and people began to question the old ways. At the same time, the war had left a deep psychological impact. A generation of young men had been exposed to the horrors of war, leading to a widespread sense of disillusionment. The optimism of the previous era was replaced by cynicism and a sense of loss. This collective trauma was reflected in the art, literature, and philosophy of the time, giving birth to movements like Dadaism and existentialism. The First World War was a devastating conflict that changed the world forever and taught us important lessons about the cost of war and the importance of diplomacy. The scars it left behind serve as a stark reminder of the destructive power of conflict and the need for peaceful resolution. It's a chapter of our history that we must remember, not to glorify war, but to understand its consequences and strive for a world where such devastation is a thing of the past.